Welcome everybody to our fourth coaches webinar series. Tonight we're talking with U of A coach Dave Rubio. Dave enters his 29th season as coach of the U of A Wildcats. He's made the NCAA tournament 20 of those years, including a Final Four appearance, 4 Elite 8 appearances, and 8 trips to the Sweet 16. Dave has amassed 527 wins in his career and is the longest tenured coach in the Pac-12 currently. He's produced 4 first-team All-Americans, an ABCA Freshman of the Year, a Pac-10 Player of the Year, a Pac-12 Setter of the Year, and 32 All-Pac-10 or 12 performers. He himself was named the A6 Volleyball Magazine Coach of the Year in 2001. He's coached high school boys and girls and was an assistant coach at Pierce College, also Cal State Northridge, and men's and women's program both. And finally got his first head coaching gig at Cal State Bakersfield, where he won a 1989 national championship. Dave, thank you for joining us and for being with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric. No, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
So what we wanted to talk about with you is this idea of sustained success. So, 29 years, you've been in the Pac-12, probably consistently the toughest conference in women's volleyball. You have 14 20-win seasons, 20 NCAA appearances. Talk to us about what's the secret. What is the secret of the sustained success that you've had?
When we first discussed this particular topic, or what I was going to speak on, and we decided that we were going to speak on this topic, you never really think about what you do every day and every year to keep your program at a certain level. And so it's been, I think, a week and a half since we discussed this. So I can share with you that climbing the mountain is a lot different than sustaining your success, and so when you're building it, and in the programs that I started with, whether it was in high school or at Cal State Bakersfield or Arizona, trying to become one of the better teams in the country and putting yourself in a position to compete for, the national championships or make a deep run in the Division I national championships, it's a lot different and a lot easier than it is sustaining the success. And the things that go into that, it's a lot more exhausting trying to maintain your success than it was when you're building your program and trying to become one of the better programs in the country. And I didn't know that at the time, and even though at Cal State Bakersfield, we were a lot like Arizona when we first started. We didn't win a lot. There was a lot of great teams ahead of us. Division II is a lot different than Division I when I got to University of Arizona. And I had some early on success at U of A when I first got hired, and I was fortunate enough to have a lot of players that were very, very talented. They just needed a little bit of a culture change and some direction. And so the first 3 years, we went to the round of 16 2 out of the 3 years, and then we did make the tournament in 1995. And then 1996, we started the climb back, and it all culminated in our run in 2001 to the Final Four. And I can tell you that from 2005 or 2006 to the present time has been by far the most difficult challenges of my career, of trying to keep University of Arizona relevant, trying to keep them at a point where they're competitive in the upper half of the conference, which in today's time is quite a feat, and try to put ourselves in a position to make a deep run in the conference, in the NCAA tournament every single year. And there's a lot that goes into that every single day, but I think the thing that sustains me and I'm excited about every single year, including this particular year, is that I'm always wanting to learn and always wanting to grow as a person and as a coach. I'm always searching ways to get better and to improve, and trying to change my perspective. And in a landscape that's constantly changing, you really have to be, I think, pretty self-aware of the kind of person, the kind of coach you are, the things you need to improve on, and try to improve on those weaknesses and kind of maintain your strengths. But it's been, for me, as I've gotten older, I've gotten a much better perspective on what it takes to be successful. I think when I was early on in the 90s, it was fly by the seat of my pants. I didn't have a real plan or a real vision. I just kind of went off coaching on based on my own intuition. The thing that really sustained me early on was just my ability to work hard and willing to outwork people. And that's a lot more difficult these days because of the legislation that's been passed and limiting our ability to work as much as we want. But the landscape for me has been different because of the fact that in the early 90s and the early 2000s, the mid 90s and the 2000s, the emphasis in volleyball and the competitive level of volleyball wasn't the same as it is now. Very much like other sports, say, let's, for example, take North Carolina, University of North Carolina soccer. Anson Dorrance, who is probably arguably one of the greatest women's coaches ever, and regardless of sport. I think he's won 19 national championships in soccer. And every year he was either in the Final Four for soccer or won the championship for almost a decade and a half. And now they're still very good, obviously very competitive, but that run of championships isn't as frequent as it used to be. And it's just because nationally the sport has become so big and so popular. And in volleyball, that's become the case as well. Back when we went to the Final Four, I only had to go through 3 or 4 teams in the conference. The conference just wasn't that strong at the top. Now the conference is 12 deep. Everyone does a great job of recruiting. Everybody can coach. Everybody knows how to do the X's and O's, run a practice. The sophistication of the coaches, especially in our conference, is top tier. And so it just, the level, the playing field is just way more competitive. And so the advantages for the conference and being able to compete at the highest level is obvious. But on the other hand, in order to be able to compete at the highest level, you got to, in a sense, also recruit the best players or be able to train the players to become the best players. So for me, sustaining the excellence has been about the work ethic and coming in every single day and have a vision of what I want to accomplish. 2 is hiring the right people. I've had some wonderful people that have really helped me be successful, and a lot of our success is attributed to them. And 3, you have to have an administration that's willing to be patient on those down years. And I've had plenty of down years. I mean, it hasn't been, a steady stream of year after year, year into year success. It's been a tough go sometimes for us.
Yeah. So I want to go back for a second that you had said earlier, when you got to U of A, you said they needed a culture change. So can you give me some specifics about what kind of changes you made to the culture, and have those changes stayed with you all these years, or have you still adapted as the years have gone by?
Well, it changes. Back then, the players really did not like each other. It was a dysfunctional group, a very talented group, but it was a very dysfunctional team. They didn't like each other to the point of probably almost getting in fistfights. And so I was, at the time I was 32 years old, and I was, again, just kind of coaching off the seat of my pants. But the one thing I knew that we needed to have is that they needed something to rally around. They had to have a common denominator. And so what I did was, and that's for the first couple of years, that I made me the common denominator. And what I mean by that is that I made it so tough and so rigorous that their focus became me, because they didn't like me, or because I was so tough and so strict and so disciplinarian type of coach, that their focus was not on them not liking their players. Their focus became them not liking me. And so as a result of that, the one thing that that group had was that they had an unbelievable competitive type of mindset that said that regardless of our situation, we're going to go out there and we're going to win, and we're going to compete to win. And so the thing that I wanted them to do is to take their mind off of not liking each other and put it right on to not liking me. Now that's, I don't know if I would go down that road again, but at that particular time it worked. And then since then, the landscape is a lot different now. Then the culture is different. And with sustained success, you know, when players walk into a program and there's a set of norms and a set of standards, then they're gonna, in a sense, acclimate to those particular norms and standards of the team. And those tend to change depending on the personnel that you have as leaders. And the leaders will set that tone inside the locker room. So that's why it's so important that from a recruiting standpoint, that you recruit the right kind of kids who you feel in 2 years are going to be in a position of influence. And oftentimes, your success as a coach, your success as a team is going to be determined by how good your leadership is inside that locker room.
So Sharita, by the way, just posted in the question, it's true we didn't get along, and she said after, that's right, we did not like Dave. So
Well, it worked.
So it worked. So what were some of the daily practices or principles that you used then that you use now that like you said, you were kind of coaching by the seat of your pants, but what are some of the principles that you're using to get, you know, to get this team to that point of excellence that you know, to get into the tournament, to be in the top echelon of the conference year in and year out? Do you have principles that might be changing year to year, but what are some of the things you do in practice, some of the standards you have, some of the principles, stuff like that?
That's a good question, Eric. I think ultimately, you know, your success and your coaching philosophy is going to be based on your core values as a person. And I don't think you can be, you can't have good, bad, you have poor core values off the floor and then try to teach good core values to your players once you start to cross that line and step over the line and become a coach. I think who you are as a person is going to be transcend into the type of coach you're going to be. And I think as you get older, certainly this has been this happened to me, is that I have a much greater perspective. I have much more compassion, even though I could use probably a larger dose of that. I'm much more empathetic towards my players. And but I think the key for me is just knowing who you are as a person and what you stand for as a person. And it doesn't have anything to do with coaching. And then you're trying to teach those values and those core values to the players as they move into your program. And for me, it's as competitive as and as stressful as it might be coaching in a conference. If you trust the process and you trust and you have faith in yourself as a coach and what you're trying to teach and the values you're trying to teach, then you have faith you'll teach the right things so that will sustain a level of success to be successful. And to me, that's been the key. It's been teaching the core values, my core values, what I believe in, the integrity and the honesty and the hard work, the discipline and the commitment to being the best you can be. And if I can get those things across to my players, then I know that we'll be very successful. And you have to kind of know what you have, and from a talent standpoint, sometimes you can't control the amount of talent that you have. The thing that you can control as a coach, though, is trying to teach your players what those core values that I stand for every single day. And that's a challenge because the players don't always come in with this, with the same values and the same characteristics that I grew up in and things that I believe in. And then that's where you kind of sometimes you run into problems. But to me, it's been about, trying to teach the hard work and the discipline and the commitment it takes to get where they want to be. Because every player is going to say, I want to be the best. I want to win a national championship. I want to be an all Pac-12 player and I want to be an All-American. Every player is going to say yes to that. You know, the question when rubber meets the road is when you're the person holding that person accountable to trying to get what they want. And they may not agree with the means by which you're trying to get them there. And then that's going to be one of the biggest challenges, and certainly has been for me, is trying to teach them and coach them and, you know, convince them that my methods and the process we're going to go by is going to work.
And so what specifically do you do for those athletes that are a struggle to buy in? Do you spend time with them? Is there, you know, what's the trick?
Well, at the end of the day, Eric, it's really about developing a trusting relationship with your players. And that's, for me, that's without question the area that I've struggled with the most. If you're going to ask, Dave, what's the thing that you struggle with the most? It's going to be the ability to connect with my players on a personal level and a level where they feel like I care about them as a person and not so much as just a player. And that's a difficult task, I think, for any head coach. I think it's easier for some head coaches than others. I think that for me, it's always been the challenge, and in this particular generation, you know, where back when Rita played, and, you know, back in the mid 90s or the early 2000s, it was more like my way or the highway. And today, in Generation Z, there's just no way you can coach that with that type of method. And it's got to be much more compassionate. It's much more of a I'm trying to think of the right word here, but you're working together, and the players really got to feel your sincerity and your genuineness for them as a person. And that's, again, I struggle with that, and I work on it, and I read about it, and I'm, you know, I'm listening to webinars, and I'm on Zoom and listening to people about it, and it's a harder deal for me. Coaching and teaching the skills and the fundamentals and putting a roster together and putting the system together. That's it. That's the part that for me is not as difficult. The part that's really hard for me and that I struggle with most is just the part that I just talked about. And once I can get a player to trust, and we can, you know, develop that trusting relationship, then they can reach their potential, whatever level that is. They're going to walk out of the program at U of A after 4 years and be absolutely the best player they can be. And we're all pretty satisfied, and we feel pretty good about what happened in the last 4 years. For those who I struggled connecting with, then it becomes a lot more difficult. And, you know, some players you can reach, and then some players you can't reach. And those are the players that I tend to struggle with the most, and sometimes they'll end up transferring.
Yeah. Christina asked a question, wanting to know, how long would you say it took you to develop a strong sense of your core values?
Well, I think that depending on how, I was fortunate, I had wonderful parents, you know, and I had great mentors growing up, and I have you know, in my career at Arizona, I've had unbelievable assistants. And so the combination of those people who have helped shape my coaching philosophy into the person I am today is, you know, I can attribute their contribution to my philosophy, but it's a work in progress. I never feel like I'm where I want to be. I'm always asking questions and asking people that I'm really close to make sure they hold me accountable for the things that we talk about every day in the office, and my players as well. I mean, the players have such a bigger voice in today's development of themselves, and so it's kind of a lifetime deal. I mean, I think if you talk to any of the great coaches, and I certainly don't put myself in that category, but I think they would tell you that it's a growing and learning progress, and it's a work in progress all the time. And to me, that's what the great part about coaching is. Every year is so new. You know, it's not like I'm going the opposite, doing the same thing year after year. I mean, the formula for success is different this year than it was last year. And even though we weren't that particularly good from a win-loss record, it's still going to be a different formula for success, and it always has been, regardless of how we were the year before.
Harold's question is this: it seems that sustaining excellence in a program must rely on recruiting students that have excellent personal values and habits. What do you do during the recruiting process to find those student athletes, and what do you do if you find a student athlete with excellent in one area but not the other?
All right, Harold, nice question. This is the question that that Rita and I are currently talking and discussing about almost every single day. So I'm glad you asked that question, because it's, you know, it's an ongoing, I think that's a philosophical part of coaching as well. And we're, you know, I can tell you that the kind of players that I know that I do best with, and I can tell you that the kind of players that we're going to be able to get, and you kind of have to, and I'm not being very specific here. Let's see if I can answer this with a little more clarity. When we recruit, the one thing that I do know is that players that have attention to detail and typically are really good students, kids who, when I think about them, that they wake up and they got all their clothes lined up in order. Everything's folded. They wake up and they make their bed. You open up their closet and they got everything in order. Every shirt is lined up, and their socks are by color code. And I mean, everything is attention to detail. Those are the kind of players that I think do really, really well. Now, obviously, you're not going to recruit players, and you're certainly not going to know if those players have those kind of habits. All right. But from a physical standpoint, if a player, we'll recruit a player that has one particular physical aspect about them, and maybe size, elite size, it may be that they can hit the ball really hard, but they can do it at the very highest level. And that means, when I say that they can get you to the Final Four. All right, they can play in the upper half of the conference and can win you a conference championship. And so if those guys can bring something to the table, something tangible, that allows us to compete at the very highest level, then that's a person that physically meets our standard. Now, in terms of work ethic and the intangible side of things, this is where Rita and I will have our greatest discussion about players. And I do much better with players who may have less talent and better intangibles in regards to being tougher, working harder, and being willing to be coached.
I should mention, by the way, two things quick. One, Rita is your assistant coach. And two, if you guys do have questions, if you haven't figured this out yet, go into the question box and just type them in, and we'll read as many as we can throughout the rest of the hour. Heather wants to know what your biggest challenge is going to be in 2020, other than hoping a season.
I could probably speak an hour on those challenges that are upcoming in this coming year. I mean, the first challenge obviously is try to get the season off the ground. I mean, right now everything is so in flux with the COVID crisis. Just figuring out a date that we can report, and a day that we're going to start, and what our conference schedule is going to look like is a challenge. But outside of that, you know, we graduated 6 players from last year's group, and last year we had a difficult year because of the concussions that we had to sustain, and you know, so that we just didn't have the depth in our roster to be able to handle all the concussions that we experienced throughout last year's season. This year it's going to be, you know, we're replacing our starting setter, Julia Patterson, who you know, was as good a setter as I've coached, and she really had a great head for the game and understood what I wanted offensively. We're going to miss our 2 starting middle blockers. We're losing out on our starting opposite. And so, and last year, McKenna Martin, who's from Phoenix, I think she was hurt all season long except for the last 2 matches of the season. So we're replacing close to 5 starters. So the challenges are going to be to try to get the setter. We had the incoming setter graduated high school a semester early and came in January. And so fortunately, we had her for a couple months before we had to shut it down. Unfortunately, she didn't get a chance to play any spring tournaments. So her development will be critical for us. The good news is that we have, a terrific recruiting class coming in. We have some players who I feel have a chance to come in and play immediately. We had a group of players, 2 players come in that transferred in, one from Rutgers and one from Tulsa. Both of those players are very solid players. So the challenge for me is to try to put the right players on the floor, and we'll have to figure that out. That's going to take some time. The other challenge is to have this unit, this group of people connect with one another at a level that allows them to play at the very best. And those things typically take a lot of time. And this year, my feeling that the season will be probably abbreviated. We're looking at a 10-week season versus a 14-week season, which is normal for us. I hope I'm wrong on that, but right now we got everything on the table in terms of the length of the season. But with so many new players coming in, I think the biggest challenge is just going to be trying to have these players connect with one another, develop a core unit, and develop a trusting relationship amongst one another and the coaching staff.
Have you had a season like this in the past where it was sort of a rebuild and they just surprised you? They kind of clicked really early and they were a really, really strong team. Have you had a season like that before?
Yeah, the most recent time was, and you guys might know this, was the year that Maddie Kingdon came in, which I think was in 2012, 2012, 2011. God, it was so long ago now. In that particular year, we had 4 starters, 4 freshman starters. We had a starting middle that was a freshman. Our setter was a freshman. Maddie was a freshman. And our opposite was a freshman. So we had 4 starting freshmen. So that would give you a good sense. And that team, we had really good leadership in the seniors. And again, I think if you're going to have such a large turnover from one year to the next and still sustain a level of success and get to the tournament, it's really going to come down to the leadership that your seniors bring. And we had Kirsty Jackson on that team, who was a terrific leader, and Courtney Karts. Both those kids really did a great job. They were terrific players, but what they did every single day really set the tone for the young players and the freshmen once they got on campus.
So then the flip side of that would be, have you had any teams that you thought would just be just magic and NCAA teams, and for whatever reason crashed and burned and just didn't come to the level that you thought they would?
Sure. I think when, if you're in coaching as long as, as I have been now, going on 33 years, including the 5 years at Bakersfield, the teams that underachieve, there's a reason why they underachieve. And oftentimes it's not the talent that underachieves. It's just, I didn't have the ability to get these guys connected, have the ability to have these guys really trust one another and be able to play for one another. And I think that's really on the coach. And those are on the down years, it's typically less about talent and more about just the chemistry and the culture of that particular group. And so there's a lot that goes into that. It's very complicated. As we go through the season, it becomes very complicated. Eric, I can tell you that the difference between making the NCAA playoffs and missing the NCAA playoffs and having a good year and a not so good year is really, really small. And I can tell you that, when I first got to Arizona, the 1991 year, they were 0-18, and I think they were 4-22. And we had a young lady on that group that was a DS. Her name was Stephanie Remp, and Stephanie was a back row player. And Stephanie, the following year, we ended up in 1992. We ended up winning 8 matches. No, excuse me, 4 matches in the conference and 10 overall. And then 1993 was kind of our breakout year. We beat UCLA when they were #1 and beat Stanford and beat a lot of team USC and end up going to the round of 16. And Stephanie Ramp, you know, when she and I sat down in a postseason meeting, she goes, "Dave, I really didn't have a lot of fun this year." And I said, okay. And I said, "Did you have a lot of fun when you were 0-18?" And she goes, "Well, kind of. I had more fun when I was 0-18 than I did when we made it to Sweet 16." And I said, "Well, Steph," I said, "that just shows you that sometimes winning and losing isn't going to determine what kind of experience you're going to have on the team." And when you have a set of expectations and you're trying to teach players how to win, it's not always going to be a lot of fun. And the difference between winning and losing, and oftentimes for the season that we haven't made the playoffs, sometimes I've enjoyed those seasons even more than the seasons that when we did go deep in the tournament. And a lot of that has to do with just the personnel and how the personnel got along and how willing they were to be coached and how hard they worked every single day. And so even in the down years, and last year is a great example, you know, we didn't make the playoffs, and we were, you know, barely hanging on at the end of the season. And we had Kamali Hiopa, who was, you know, was supposed to be a libero for us, was hitting on the opposite. We just didn't have anybody to play. And, you know, that last 8 to 10 matches was magical for me. I mean, I love those guys. They played their hearts out every single day. And so even though we didn't have a lot of success in terms of wins and losses, I really enjoyed that group, and I think they would tell you that they really had a great time as well.
That's a great answer. Gabriel wants to know, how can you give a player a voice without disrupting your process?
Well, I think that the challenge for me, and this is where having great personnel, and I say personnel meaning assistants, having great assistants, the value of having great assistants. Players will always intend to go to the assistants to ask questions first. If they have an issue, they will always go to the assistants first and ask them to come talk to me about whatever issue or whatever they have that they might be questioning. And this is where, one, you need loyalty as an assistant. So if there's anybody out here that's listening that wants to become an assistant coach, regardless of level, the number one attribute you need to bring to the table for your head coach is loyalty. In these situations, when players come to you as an assistant and start to ask and question about the methods and about the direction the team is taking, which is always going to happen, the assistant has a really great opportunity to be loyal or to be disloyal. And here it's critical that the assistant understands how important it is to say, look, here are the reasons why the head coach is doing this. Here's what you need to understand, and see it coming from his eyes and from my eyes. And then encourage the player to come talk to the head coach. And the key, again, of developing and building that relationship between the head coach and the player is that the assistants, when put in a position, is that they're always encouraging those players to come and have a relationship and talk, be honest with the head coach. The head coach is intimidating, certainly at this level. You know, I don't see myself that way, but of course, you know, you just don't see that at being in the position that I'm at. But the assistants are the ones who can really shape the direction, individual players, and the development of the relationship between the head coach and those particular players. And some of them are just, like I said, unwilling to do that. They don't like coming in the office and seeing how things are going and, discussing things with me. But I know that my assistants in the past with Rita and Greg, when Greg was with me, they would always consistently encourage the players to come and talk to me. And then I would, reach out to them as well. The difficult part about being a head coach is that there's only one of you and there's 18 of them. And there's a lot of things on, the head coaches play every single day. And so the job of the assistants is to really mitigate the things that are going on in the team and really point them at the players, help them point in the direction they need to go to help them get what they want.
That kind of leads right into Regina's question here. Over the last 20 years, have you noticed a change in your players' off-court personal confidence? Do you see more, less, or the same?
Well, I think that the confidence, the self-esteem, and just the way that players look at themselves has always been a challenge, regardless of what era that the players came from. I think the players' confidence and their self-talk and their, as Rita would say, their self-compassion has always been the area where they struggle. Most players will struggle the most. It's rare to find a young player who walks in the door and feels like they can't make a mistake, and they're really resilient after making a mistake. And I think that today's kids, if you read the studies, that resiliency is not one of their stronger suits. Their attention span is much shorter than was even 10 years ago. And so they're way more sophisticated than they ever been. They know more, they're more knowledgeable, and yet they're much more fragile, and they're not as resilient. They're not as tough. And so, if there was a conference or a webinar done by Brian Curtis that we listened to just not too long ago, and he ran down this Generation Z, and it's like every characteristic that he mentioned, I'm thinking about the players on my team, and I'm going, okay, that makes sense. I get it now. I know why she's reacting the way she is. And so the real key is that they're not the ones that have to change. I'm the one that has to change. And that's really an important key that I, have learned to throughout the years. Is that I cannot be the same coach I was in 1992. If I was, I wouldn't be around because I'd be fired. I can't say the same things. I can't act the same way. I can't treat the players the same way either. And so today and if you don't evolve as a coach, and if you don't understand how the landscape is changing in terms of how the players best respond to your style of coaching, then you're going to put yourself in a position where you're not going to have a job any longer. And so longevity, when you talk about sustaining excellence, you're also talking about longevity, and longevity at this level, at a school like Arizona, where there's inequities in recruiting on every level, but it's Tucson, in the city of Tucson. I don't want to make the Tucsonians upset, but out of the 12 schools in the conference, University of Arizona is probably 9th on the list of players where they would really want to go to school. All right, there's just not a lot of players that if we go head to head with, that we're going to out recruit those players. All right, we were really fortunate to get somebody like Jalen Hodge this year. She was one of the top 20 players in the country. Everybody knew about her. We had to fight like crazy to get her, and that's really been unusual. And the last player we were able to get out of the state of Arizona at that level was Whitney Dostie. And that was kind of an inside job because her dad played basketball here and was best friends with one of my closest friends. So it's really, I think, one of those situations where if you're not changing and understanding the type of players that you're currently coaching, you're going to find yourself in hot water. And believe me, in the 29 years that I've been here, I've been in the hot water. I mean, there's been some years when I wasn't sure if I was coming back.
Wow. Kimberly wants to know, how much guidance do you give your team leaders? What does it look like to let them lead on and off the court, both?
For years, I can tell you that we never chose captains. And only within the last probably 4 or 5 years, I decided that that choosing a captain was the best thing for the teams now. And a lot of it is, some of it was because we had really strong personalities who could handle the leadership that goes along with being a captain. But I also believe that players now some players are looking for that particular responsibility. So we nurture that with the players who we identify as players who are willing to accept the roles, the leadership role. It's not an easy one, and a lot of players really don't want that responsibility. It's hard enough for them to show up and practice every day without having the responsibility of leading and leading by example. That's a tough thing today. But we definitely we talk about it, we vote about it, the kids vote on it, and then we have a discussion. And it's been a good thing for us for the last couple of years. In this particular year, Paige Whipple, who's been a 4-year starter for us as an outside hitter, she clearly is the team leader for us. We're nurturing some players that are currently in the program that I think that will be good once Paige leaves next year. And then I'm hoping there's 1 or 2 or 3 players in the upcoming freshman class that also demonstrate those kind of qualities that I feel that you need to have in order to be able to be a good leader.
Going off topic a little bit here, DJ says he's always appreciated your accessibility to coaches here in Tucson. He wants to see the boys in the men's game grow. What do you think can be done, or what do you think is holding back the growth of boys and men's volleyball here in Southern Arizona?
Well, if it was before the crisis, I'd say the only thing that was holding us back was money. And now it's there's a lot more things. It's a lot more complicated now, and at the time I was pretty committed and still am committed to trying to get men's volleyball at U of A. I think that we have an athletic director, Dave Hickey, who I think is receptive to that before the crisis. But now I think there's just so many more issues that right now are going to take that right off the table until we can kind of solve the budgetary issues that we're facing right now because of this crisis. So I think if we ever get to the point where intercollegiate athletics goes back to normal, which I don't know if that's going to be the case, then we can start having conversation about men's volleyball. But I think one of the real tragedies that's going to happen is this minor sports or the Olympic sports like men's volleyball or water polo or fencing or any of those other sports, and schools are going to end up cutting those sports. That's my biggest worry.
Raylene wants to know, relationship building is key. What would you say are some visual examples of how you display relationship building with your staff to exercise that loyalty piece that you spoke of?
Well, again, one of the things that's important is you, as a head coach or at any level, is recognize your weaknesses. And we always try to play to our strengths. And again, this is for me. Again, it's a struggle for me, but what I try to do is I try to connect to the players, and again, the level of communication is important and paramount here. One is I'm not, the texting is great, but it's so impersonal to me. But the players really would prefer texting than it is to me having a meeting with them in the office. So there's a lot of times that I'll text them just to see how they're doing and have nothing to do with volleyball. If I have a conversation with my players that have nothing to do with volleyball, that may be one of the best things that I can do to enhance my relationship with them. And what's kind of ironic is that during this time, this last, since we've been down, this is I think going on our 10th week here being shut down, is that my relationship with my players on a personal level it's better than it's ever has been, because volleyball is not really part of the equation. My conversation with them is always, how you doing? How you feeling? How you getting along without working out? And how is it at home? how are you doing mentally and emotionally? I mean, there's a lot of more personal questions and conversations I'm having with my players that have nothing to do with volleyball. And, for me, volleyball is my life, my passion, it's everything, my family, it's my lifestyle. So it's difficult for me not to have that part of the equation enter every conversation. And yet I know intellectually that for me to establish a good trusting relationship, that part of the equation needs to be taken out. And that's where it's hard for me. I'm kind of a one-dimensional guy, although I like to surf and I like my cars. And so I like the ballroom dance occasionally. And so I think that, those are things that have been good in this particular part of the crisis.
Yeah. I just want to remind the attendees we've got about 10 minutes left. So if you got any questions for Dave, get them up quick. I want to make sure I get it to as many as we can. DJ wants to know, is there great value, in your opinion, in training club level kids in mental skills? And if so, how?
Well, that's a loaded question. Yes, I coach my daughters. I've been coaching club volleyball now going on my 5th year. All right. And I started 5 years ago with my oldest daughter, who at the time was 13. And then I handed her off. She decided to play beach volleyball only 2 years ago. And then I started coaching my 12-year-old daughter, which was probably maybe out of all the years of coaching was the most difficult year of coaching in my life when I started coaching my 12-year-old daughter, not because of her, but because of the age group. And for those of you who are coaching 12 and under, holy smokes, my hat off to you, because my patience level, which I always felt like I was a patient person, really got the best of me during that particular club season. But I can tell you that the mental habits part of it and the behavior part of teaching mental habits is by far much more difficult than teaching skills and physical parts of the game. And again, the physical part of the game is, you can learn those things pretty quickly. How to keep your arms straight, how to put your arm together, arm swing and blocking, all those things are easily learned and easily taught, in my opinion. All you got to do is get on a website, which I do quite often, by the way. Is I get on a lot of websites and go to club practices and watch club practices. I get a lot of creativity and steal a lot of drills on those websites. But the mental part of it and how willing you are to push kids is I think the real art of coaching. That's not the science of coaching. The science of coaching is that, the X's and O's but it's the art of coaching is how to say something nicely when a kid really needs to be patted on the back, and how to push a player and, kind of kick her in the tail when she needs to be pushed a little bit harder, hold her accountable when she's just about to her breaking point. And I'd say that my conversation with my 12-year-old parents on the very first team meeting, and I know that I can say this, I can get away with this. Not many coaches can get away with this, but I just told the parents, I said, just drop your kid off at the door and then get out of my way. All right. And so I said, if you have any problems, any issues with me at all about playing time, I'm not going to have a discussion with you. If you have an issue with me and the way that I treat your player, then you and I can have a discussion about that. And the key is that when you're teaching players good mental habits, is that they're not always going to be happy. And you have to understand that, is that the players in today's world is that we always want our kids to be happy and not to be unhappy. And so, but if they're going to be tough and they're going to be competitive, then you're going to have to push them to a point where they're uncomfortable. And players and people generally don't like to be in that uncomfortable position. But that's the process of becoming a better player. And to be honest with you, when Rita and I are discussing recruiting, it's about recruiting tough, competitive kids. And so, like I said before, when we're recruiting, I'll take a kid with lesser talent that's got better intangibles.
Wow. Mark wants to know, have you ever explored the 5 dysfunctions of a team in an effort to open up more trusting relationships?
I have. again, I work on that every day, and that's a book that I need to continue to read. There's another great book by the same author that's called The Ideal Teammate, that has nothing to do with sports. That's an excellent book as well. But it's about, developing those relationships is about time and effort, and that really falls on my shoulders.
You had talked earlier about your expectations for teams year in and year out. Sometimes they're high, sometimes they're not as high. But do you have specific coaching goals every year? And is it maybe one might be on the physical, wins losses side? The other is just like you said, the last 10 games of last season, you saw your group just play spirited and have fun. Do you have different goals like that every year?
Well, this last year will be a good example. I thought that we had a team that could make a really deep run in the playoffs. We had the right talent, we had the right setter, we had all the right components physically. I thought the team was older, and experience means an awful lot when you're, kind of put that on the table as a goal. But there's certain things that happen along the way, and if half your lineup or over half your lineup is out the entire season with concussions, and I think you have to reestablish or readjust your goals, which we did. And then it just became about development, about individual and personal development for the players that were on the team, and then for the younger players who were starting. And so I think that, like for example, this coming year, my expectations will be to make the tournament. If we can make the tournament, I think it'll be a terrific year. And I think we're trying to establish and build the building blocks so that we can make a Final Four run and put ourselves in a position to win a national championship in 4 years. That doesn't happen overnight. To me, that's a 4-year process. And it's hard to share those visions with your team. It's not hard to share those visions, but for your team to believe in that, because in today's generation, maybe more so than any other generation, is that they want and expect immediate results. And so I think that if I can get a core group of players out of this next group to believe in that process and the 4-year process, then I really believe in my heart that we can get there. We'll be good enough to get there.
April wants to know, what recommendations do you have for the Native American population who would like to be recruited at the D1 level, but sometimes don't have the opportunities that others have, who play for bigger clubs or bigger schools? And April, by the way, I hope everybody up north is doing well and healthy. So anyway.
I would echo that. We had a young lady, Elvina with Clark, was part of our group back in the early 90s, and she was up from Kayenta, Arizona, and really to this day was added so much to our team and our program and to me personally. And I think that she takes a lot of pride, and I know she does, in her playing with us. And she was on the team that went to the round of 16 and was a back row player for us. Opportunities for the Native Americans are there. It may come in the form of going through a junior college first, and they got to go to the right junior college, a junior college that has a history of being able to place players. But there's a lot of different levels of Division I. That's the one thing that I think players don't realize, or maybe they realize and just unwilling to travel in a location and go to school in an area of the country that they don't feel comfortable with. But the opportunities to play in college are certainly there, and at Division I level, depending on what level you're capable of play at, I think they're there. You just got to be very proactive in your pursuit of that goal. You got to get on the phone with all those coaches. You got to put yourself in a position to be seen. And the video right now, for all of us, especially at this particular time, that's all we're doing is watching video every single day. So I think that if you're proactive enough, you can put yourself in a position to be seen.
Gabriel, going back to your 12 club experience, could you please share what the basics of your process is with your 12-year-old travel team?
In what regard in the process? I'm surviving every day in every practice. The thing about coaching 12s that I didn't realize is that with I'm used to teaching somebody a skill or a part of the system, and they understanding it and then remembering it. You know, if I had to tell them 5 or 6 times, I'm used to them eventually learning that and remembering it. And the 12-year-olds, that's not the case. The 12-year-olds is that you could be saying the same thing every single day and every single practice and every single, I mean, until you're blue in the face, and the players still don't remember. And that was really a new experience for me. And I probably didn't handle it very well. So I apologize to all my 12-year-olds that I coached 2 years ago.
We're closing in now. Give me the 3 takeaways that you want the coaches to understand about actually sustaining success for a long period of time, in a program. What would be the 3 things that you would point to?
I think that you have to understand what you are about. I think your own core values, your characteristics that are important to you. If you were going to raise your kids, what would you teach your own children? The honesty and the work ethic, the commitment, the discipline that goes along with that. I think those are things that you instill in your team. I think that's one. And I think you live that every single day when you're coaching. And I certainly have. I think it's a lifelong learning and growth process. And I think if you ever feel like you can't learn, you learned enough and you can stop learning, I think that's when you're doomed. I think you need to continue to learn and continue to stretch yourself, get yourself out of your comfort zone. And I think a lot of that comes down to the people that you surround yourself with. And we're in the process of looking for a new assistant right now. And one of the things when I talk to the people who call me, it's like, I don't want a yes person. I want someone who has their own opinion and has the willingness to have a discussion, a spirited discussion if necessary. And I think that's important too. And 3, you got to have the work ethic, and the vision that goes with it to see what your program wants to be year in and year out. And so I think those 3 things are things that help me sustain my level of success. And so I've been really fortunate to be here at U of A for this long. I've weathered a lot of storms, and I can tell you that one of the what they say is the golden rule, right? Which is treat others like you want to be treated. And I think that there's a lot of people that, when they first got into University of Arizona as a worker, say the development office of marketing or sports information, and then 10 years later, they happen to be my boss. And then they're my supervisor now. And if I, for whatever reason, would have treated them poorly, I wouldn't be here at U of A. And I said, so I think it's critical that people understand that if you treat everybody the right way, that eventually that comes back to you as well.
Wow. Dave, we can't thank you enough. Do you have any camp information? Are you guys running camps this summer?
We were we were told that we cannot run camp at U of A, but we have reserved the facility, Sporting Chance, which is a really nice facility. It's going to be a much smaller scale. It will not be a resident camp, but it will be in a really nice place. And we're looking at getting between 60 to 80 kids per camp, along with our team camp. We go 8 to 12 teams in the team camp, and it's going to be from 9 to 3 on the outside of the team camp. So all the other camps is going to be 9 to 3. And so it's going to be much more of it's a non-resident camp. And if you guys want to get on the website, you're interested in that, get on the website at davidrubiovolleyballcamp.com, and you can see the dates and the times. It runs along the same time and the same dates as it was originally. It's just on a different site. But it's been a pleasure being here, Eric, as always. I love Arizona, and I love the region and the volleyball level here, and what's happened in our region. My only wish that we could keep a couple of the players home, whether it be at ASU or Arizona, with these good places, good schools, good coaches here at U of A, and in the state of Arizona, and I'm hoping that in the future we can keep some of those guys home.
Well, David, we appreciate your time. Thank you for your insights. It was great. I want to remind the attendees that Wednesday, Positive Coaching Alliance, we'll be talking about mastery, and then Thursday, talking about positive coaching. Both of those we still have more room for if you want to join us. Dave, thank you for your time, and your insight was unbelievably great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eric. It's great. You guys have a great break, and I'll see you later. Be safe.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye.